The lock clicked, and I knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. Call it intuition, or just years of living with manipulative people, but that extra half-second of resistance told me everything had changed. I'm Soleil, and this was the moment my life imploded. Or so they thought. "Hello," I called out, stepping into what should have been my living room. Instead of our usual cream sectional and my grandmother's antique coffee table, I found stacked moving boxes labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. The walls were bare, hooks exposed where our photos once hung. My phone buzzed. Rick's face lit up the screen, and I let it ring. 3 years of marriage, and he couldn't even be here for whatever this was. "Oh, darling, you're early," my mother Marlene's voice carried from the kitchen, that fake sugary tone she used when she was particularly pleased with herself. She emerged wearing her signature pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We wanted to surprise you with the packing. Everything's ready for your big move." "What move?" My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. The envelope in my purse, containing proof of my secret apartment purchase, suddenly felt heavier. "The one you've been planning, silly. Rick told me all about your dreams of moving abroad. As your mother, I couldn't let you struggle with all this alone." She gestured at the boxes. "The house sold yesterday, above asking price." My stomach dropped. The house Rick and I bought together, my name on the deed, sold without my knowledge or consent. "That's impossible," I said. "I never signed anything." Marlene's smile flickered. "Oh, but you did, sweetheart. Remember that stack of papers Rick brought home last month? The investment documents? The real estate contract hidden in a stack of routine paperwork? Classic Rick, classic Marlene. I should have seen it coming." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Natasha. 911, "Rick's telling everyone you're moving to Singapore. What's happening?" The front door opened, and Lindsay, our neighborhood real estate agent, walked in with a clipboard. "Oh, Mrs. Parker, I didn't expect you here. Your husband said you were at a business retreat." She glanced nervously between Marlene and me. "Lindsay," I said, "could you please show me the sale documents?" I have them right here." She rifled through her papers, hands shaking slightly. "Everything's in order, signed by both you and Mr. Parker last week." I took the papers, my eyes finding my signature, or rather, a convincing forgery. Years of watching Marlene forge my father's signature on checks had taught me what to look for: the slight hesitation in the S, the too perfect loop in the L. "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone and taking photos of every page. "And the buyers?" "An investment group," Lindsay said. "They're planning to renovate and flip." "That's enough, Lindsay," Marlene cut in sharply. "Everything's settled. Soleil, darling, why don't we discuss this over tea? I've packed your favorite cups." My phone buzzed a third time. "Bruno, Rick's business partner. Need to talk. Rick's trying to transfer company shares. Something's not right." I looked at my mother, this woman who had orchestrated my entire life since childhood, always under the guise of protection and love. She stood there, perfectly coiffed, probably already planning how to spin this when I inevitably broke down. But I wasn't going to break down. Not this time. "Actually, Mom, I have a meeting." I turned to Lindsay. "I'll be in touch about these documents. I suggest you keep copies." "Soleil," Marlene called as I headed for the door. "Don't be dramatic. This is for your own good. You've always been so impulsive." I paused, hand on the doorknob, and smiled. The same smile she'd taught me to use at charity galas and business functions. "You know what, Mom? For once you're right, I am impulsive." I walked out, closing the door on her startled face, and pulled out the envelope containing the deed to my new apartment. They thought they were forcing me into a corner, but they'd just given me the perfect opportunity to disappear. My phone buzzed again. "Rick, baby, let me explain. Your mom and I were just trying to help. Call me." I blocked his number and opened my messages to Bruno. "Meet me at Harlan's office in an hour. Bring everything you have on those share transfers." The game they started. I was about to change all the rules. 6 months before my world exploded, I sat across from Harlan in his corner office, watching him review my investment portfolio. "You've done well keeping this quiet," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Very well, but why not tell Rick about the startup profits?" I traced the rim of my coffee cup. "Remember what you told me when I was your intern? Always keep an ace up your sleeve." Harlan chuckled. "I meant in negotiations, not marriage. Same thing when you're married to someone like Rick." I pulled out my laptop, showing him the property listing I'd been eyeing. "What do you think?" His eyebrows shot up at the luxury high-rise apartment. "That's quite an ace. 19th floor, separate entrance, top security, and most importantly, off the radar." He finished. "You're planning for something." The memory shifted to 3 months later, standing in my empty apartment, keys in hand. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city Rick and Marlene would never find me in. I'd furnished it slowly, carefully, using cash and different delivery names. A knock at my door jolted me back to the present. I checked the security camera. It was Bruno, right on time. "Nice place," he said, stepping inside. "Very you. Nothing like that suburban showcase Rick and your mother picked out." "Speaking of Rick," I said, leading him to the kitchen island. "Tell me about these share transfers." Bruno pulled out his tablet. "He's trying to move everything to a new holding company, one where you're not listed as a beneficiary." "Show me." As Bruno swiped through documents, my phone lit up with a text from Natasha. "Your mom's telling everyone you had a mental breakdown. Rick's playing the worried husband. Want me to set the record straight?" "Not yet," I typed back. "Let them dig their hole deeper." "Look at this," Bruno said, pointing to a transaction date. "The day before they sold your house, Rick transferred $200,000 to an offshore account." I leaned closer. "Can you trace it?" "Already did. It's registered to a shell company owned by—" He paused for effect. "Your mother." "Of course it is." I walked to the windows, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. "Why are you helping me, Bruno? Rick's been your partner for years." "Because 6 months ago, I overheard him and Marlene planning this whole thing. I should have warned you then." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Soleil. I thought they'd back down." "Don't be sorry, be useful." I turned back to him. "How much do you know about corporate takeovers?" His eyes widened. "You're not serious." "Dead serious. Rick thinks he's protecting his assets. Let's see how he likes it when his partner helps his wife take control of the company." "It's risky," Bruno said. But he was already pulling up more documents. "We'd need proof of fraudulent activities, shareholder support, like forged signatures, and illegal transfers." I retrieved a folder from my office. "I've been collecting evidence since I found the first discrepancy in our joint accounts last year. I just needed the right moment." Another text from Natasha. "Marlene's throwing a charity gala next week. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Perfect timing," I murmured. "What are you thinking?" Bruno asked. I showed him the invitation Marlene had sent weeks ago, before their plan unfolded. "I'm thinking it's time for the grieving husband and concerned mother to face their mentally unstable victim in public. They'll try to discredit you. Let them try." I pulled up the photos of the forged documents on my phone. "I've already sent copies to 3 different lawyers. If anything happens to me, everything goes public." Bruno whistled low. "You really did learn from Harlan." "I learned from everyone," I said, thinking of all the times I'd watched Marlene manipulate situations to her advantage. I just applied those lessons differently. My security system chimed with an alert. Someone had left a package at my door. The camera showed a courier walking away. Inside the package was a single photo. Me, age 7, sitting on my father's lap. On the back, in Marlene's handwriting, "Remember who you are." "What is it?" Bruno asked, noting my expression. I handed him the photo. "A reminder that my mother still thinks she can control me with guilt." I took the photo back and dropped it in my shredder. "She's about to learn otherwise." "The gala's in 8 days," Bruno said. "What's our first move?" I smiled, thinking of the evidence safely stored in my safe. The offshore account numbers, the forged documents. First, we let them think they've won. Then we show them exactly who I've become. The city lights seemed brighter now, each one a star in my constellation of revenge. Let them think I'm having a breakdown. Their perfect plan was about to become their perfect nightmare. You need to see this, Natasha said, barging into my apartment with her laptop. She'd been digging through old financial records, as only an investigative journalist could. Remember that summer house your mom sold after your dad died? I looked up from my workstation, where I'd been analyzing Rick's company financials. The one in Maine, she said the maintenance costs were too high. Yeah, well, look who bought it. She spun her laptop around, showing me a property record. The buyer's name made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. Richard Parker, LLC, dated 3 months before I even met Rick. He knew my mother before we met, I said slowly. All this time. There's more. Natasha pulled up another document. Your mom's been on his company payroll as a consultant for 5 years, 20 grand a month. The pieces clicked together like a twisted puzzle. They set me up from the beginning. My phone buzzed. Marlene, again, her 6th call today. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker. Darling, this silence is childish. The doctors are very concerned. Rick and I only want what's best for you. Call me back. Natasha rolled her eyes. Doctors, she's really pushing this mental breakdown angle. Of course she is. I pulled out an old photo album, flipping to a specific. Look at this. The photos showed teenage me in a hospital bed, looking confused and medicated. Marlene stood beside me, the perfect picture of maternal concern. I remember this in episode junior year. After I threatened to move in with Dad, I closed the album. Suddenly, I was unstable and needed rest. 3 weeks in a private facility later, I was back under her roof. My security system chimed. Bruno's face appeared on the screen. Perfect timing, I said, buzzing him in. Tell me you found something. He entered, looking grimmer than usual. Rick's trying to force an emergency board meeting. Says he needs to address concerns about company stability given your condition. When? Tomorrow morning, I smiled, making both Natasha and Bruno look nervous. Good. Time to play our first card. Soleil, Natasha warned. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I pulled up my email and started typing. Remember Tommy from the Business Journal? Still owe you that exclusive. Natasha's eyes widened. The one who broke the tech startup scandal last year? That's perfect, actually. Bruno, I said. How many board members follow Tommy's column? All of them. It's required reading in our industry. I hit send. Well, they'll have some interesting breakfast reading tomorrow. Anonymous source reveals concerning pattern of financial discrepancies at Parker Technologies. Rick will know it was you, Bruno said. No, he'll suspect it was me, but he can't prove it without admitting to the offshore transfers. I checked my watch. Now, about those doctors Marlene mentioned. Natasha was already on it, typing furiously. Got it. Dr. Marcus at Bellevue Wellness. Want me to pay him a visit? Better. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harlan's number. Remember that ethics violation we documented last year? Time to cash in that chip. Within an hour, Dr. Marcus's office called Marlene. On speaker, thanks to Harlan's influence with the medical board. I recorded every word. Mrs. Parker, this is highly irregular. I've never evaluated your daughter, and I cannot and will not provide any documentation suggesting otherwise. If you contact my office about this again, I'll be forced to report this to the authorities. Natasha whistled. Your mom's getting sloppy. She's desperate, I corrected. And desperate people make mistakes. My phone lit up with a text from Rick. Board meeting tomorrow. Last chance to talk. Don't make me do this. Do what? Bruno asked, reading over my shoulder. I showed them both the photos I'd been saving, documents showing Rick had been embezzling company funds long before the current situation. He's going to try to frame me for his financial misdeeds. Too bad I have proof of exactly when each transaction occurred. The board meeting's at 9, Bruno said. What's our play? I pulled up the presentation I'd been preparing. You'll propose an emergency audit. I'll arrive at 9:30, just late enough for Rick to have dug himself into a hole. And then? Natasha prompted. I opened my safe and removed a thick folder. Then we show everyone exactly who's been playing games with company money, including proof of Marlene's consulting fees for services never rendered. They won't know what hit them, Bruno said. Oh, they will. I checked my reflection in the window, adjusting my blazer. They'll know exactly what hit them. They'll just be powerless to stop it. The city lights flickered below, and somewhere out there, Rick and Marlene were probably congratulating themselves on their perfect plan. By this time tomorrow, they'd learn what real manipulation looks like. The boardroom fell silent as I pushed open the glass doors. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Rick froze mid-sentence, his presentation about my supposed mental instability still projected on the screen behind him. Please, I said, smoothing my skirt as I sat down. Don't stop on my account. Soleil, Rick stammered. This is a closed meeting. About me? I smiled, placing my folder on the table. How thoughtful. I brought some materials to contribute to the discussion. The board members exchanged glances. Rick's face had gone from shocked to calculating. I could practically see him reformulating his strategy. As I was saying, he continued, my wife's recent behavior. Actually, Bruno interrupted, standing up. Before we continue, I move for an emergency audit of company finances. Absolutely not, Rick snapped. This meeting is about addressing the stability of the company. I opened my folder and began distributing documents. Perfect. Let's address that. The board members began reviewing the papers, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern. Rick grabbed a copy, his face paling as he recognized the offshore account statements. These transactions, board member Janet said, they're all authorized by you, Rick. Those documents are fake, Rick declared. Clearly part of my wife's paranoid. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from Dr. Marcus's office. Marlene's voice filled the room, followed by the doctor's clear denial of ever treating me. Would anyone like to discuss the consulting fees paid to my mother? I continued, sliding more documents across the table. $240,000 annually for services that seemed to consist entirely of planning my marriage to Rick. That's ridiculous, Rick protested, but his voice had lost its confidence. Is it? I nodded to Bruno, who pulled up a new presentation. Here's the timeline. Rick meets my mother at a business conference. 3 months later, he purchases our family's summer house through a shell company. 2 months after that, he, coincidentally, meets me at a charity event Marlene organized. And throughout our entire relationship, he's been paying her a consultant's salary. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Janet was already on her phone, presumably calling their lawyers. You don't understand, Rick tried again. Soleil's unwell. She's imagining, like I imagined you forging my signature to sell our house. I produced the real estate documents with the forensics report highlighting the forgery. Or like I imagined the $200,000 you transferred to my mother's offshore account the day before the sale. My phone buzzed, a text from Natasha. Tommy's article just dropped. It's trending. Right on cue. Phones around the table started pinging with notifications. Rick lunged for his device, face draining of color as he read. This is a hit piece, he sputtered. Pure speculation. The Business Journal's lawyers vetted every word, I said calmly. They're particularly interested in the pattern of financial discrepancies that seem to coincide with your marriage to me, almost like it was all part of a plan. The board chairman cleared his throat. Rick, I think you should leave the room while we discuss this matter. You can't be serious, Rick protested. I built this company. Actually, Bruno interjected, you own 30%, I own 30%, and Soleil, through the shares you transferred to her name during your marriage, owns 15%. Care to do the math? Rick's face contorted with rage. You planned this. You and Bruno. Planned what? I asked innocently. To protect the company from fraud, to expose financial misconduct. Isn't that our duty as shareholders? My phone buzzed again. Marlene, what have you done? Rick's lawyer just called. I blocked her number without reading the rest. Rick, the chairman said firmly, please step out. As Rick slammed the door behind him, I addressed the board. I have a proposal for restructuring the company leadership, one that will protect our shareholders and restore confidence in our financial stability. And your mother's involvement, Janet asked, is extensively documented and ready for the SEC's review. I smiled. Along with every other aspect of this scheme, the meeting lasted another 2 hours. By the end, Rick was suspended pending investigation, and I was appointed to the executive committee with Bruno as interim CEO. Outside the boardroom, Natasha was waiting with coffee and a tablet showing Tommy's article. The headline read, Tech Executive's House of Cards, Marriage, Manipulation, and Money Laundering. Well? She asked. I took the coffee, watching Rick being escorted out by security. Now we wait for Marlene's next move. You think she'll retaliate? Oh, I'm counting on it. I checked my watch. Her charity gala is in 3 days, and thanks to Rick's generous donation last month, I'm still on the guest list. Natasha grinned. Want company? Absolutely. After all, I said, stepping into the elevator, every good show needs an audience. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the forced laughter of the city's elite. I adjusted my emerald gown, the one Rick always said was too bold, and made my entrance with Natasha at my side. Conversations stuttered to a halt as heads turned. My mother stood at the center of her usual circle, champagne flute freezing halfway to her lips as she spotted me. Darling, she called out, voice carrying across the room. What a surprise. Really? I glided over, accepting a champagne from a passing waiter. After all those concerned voicemails about my mental health, I thought you'd be relieved to see me functioning so well. Her perfectly painted smile tightened. Of course, but given recent events, you mean the company audit or the house sale? I turned to her friends. Has my mother told you about her consulting work? $240,000 a year. Quite impressive for someone with no business experience. Soleil, she hissed, grabbing my arm. Let's discuss this privately. Why, you didn't keep my supposed mental breakdown private. Phones started buzzing around us. Natasha had timed her social media posts perfectly. Screenshots of Marlene's attempts to bribe Dr. Marcus, complete with bank transfers. Ladies, Marlene said to her increasingly uncomfortable circle, would you excuse us? She practically dragged me toward a quiet corner, her nails digging into my arm. What do you think you're doing? Learning from the best, Mom. Isn't this what you taught me? Image is everything? I taught you to be smart, she snapped, not vindictive. Smart like selling my house behind my back, or smart like setting me up with a man who's been on your payroll for years. Her face paled slightly. You don't understand. Actually, I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone, showing her the summer house documentation. You and Rick had this planned before I even met him. The question is, why? Mrs. Parker, a voice interrupted us. It was Janet from the board, accompanied by 2 serious-looking men in suits. These gentlemen are from the SEC. They have some questions about your consulting arrangement with Parker Technologies. Marlene's composure cracked for just a moment. This isn't a good time. It never is with you, Mom. I stepped back, watching her carefully constructed world begin to crumble. But I'm sure they'll wait while you explain to your guests why the charity's accounts are being frozen. What? Her head snapped up. Oh, didn't Rick tell you? The $200,000 he transferred to your offshore account? It came from the charity's endowment fund. The SEC agents exchanged glances and made notes on their tablets. You wouldn't, Marlene whispered. This foundation is my life's work. Like my marriage was my life's work, I took a sip of champagne. Besides, I didn't do anything. Rick made those transfers. I'm just the concerned whistleblower. Natasha appeared at my elbow. Sorry to interrupt, but you'll want to see this. She held up her phone, showing a breaking news alert. Tech executive arrested for financial fraud and embezzlement. Rick, Marlene grabbed the phone. No, no, no. Yes, I said softly, and he's already offering to cooperate with investigators. Something about proving he was acting under someone else's direction. The color drained from Marlene's face. Around us, party guests were whispering and pointing, phones raised to capture the moment. Mrs. Parker, one of the SEC agents, said, "We need you to come with us. This is your fault." She hissed at me. "I gave you everything." "You gave me what you wanted me to have," I corrected. "Now I'm taking what I deserve." As the agents led her away, her perfectly crafted mask finally shattered. "I'm your mother." "No," I said, loud enough for the watching crowd to hear. "You're my cautionary tale." Natasha waited until they were gone before speaking. "You okay?" "Better than okay." I surveyed the shocked faces of my mother's former social circle. "Ladies, I believe the silent auction is still open. Shall we support some actual charitable causes tonight?" The next hour passed in a blur of donations and not-so-subtle questions about what would happen to the foundation. I answered each one with practiced grace, watching my mother's carefully constructed social empire collapse in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Bruno. Rick's lawyer called. "He's willing to tell everything in exchange for a deal." "Let him," I typed back. "The more he talks, the clearer the picture becomes." Natasha touched my arm. "Ready to go?" I looked around the ballroom one last time, at the crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, at the trappings of the life my mother had always prized above everything else. "Actually," I said, "I think I'll stay a bit longer. After all, someone needs to make sure the charity's remaining funds go to the right places. And it has nothing to do with watching your mom's society friends scramble to distance themselves." I smiled, accepting another glass of champagne. "Consider it a bonus feature of justice being served." "Your mother's asking to see you," Harlan said, setting a thick manila envelope on my desk. "She's been calling my office daily." From her lawyer's office or the federal holding facility? I didn't look up from the company reports I was reviewing. Both, actually. He sat down across from me. Rick's testimony hit her hard. She didn't expect him to flip so quickly. She never did understand loyalty goes both ways. I finally met Harlan's eyes. "What's in the envelope?" "Something you need to see. It's about your father's death." My hands froze over the keyboard. "What about it?" "Open it." Inside were bank statements, insurance documents, and a handwritten letter. My father's signature was at the bottom, dated 3 days before his accident. "He knew," Harlan said quietly, "about Marlene's plan to marry you off to Rick, about the company takeover strategy, everything." I scanned the letter, my throat tightening. He was going to expose them. The brake lines on his car didn't fail by accident, Soleil. The office door burst open as Bruno rushed in. "Turn on the news, now." I grabbed the remote, and my mother's face filled the screen. She was leaving the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. "My daughter has orchestrated a vindictive campaign to destroy her family," she was saying. "But what she doesn't know—" "Mute it," I snapped, but not before catching her next words. "About her real father." Harlan and Bruno exchanged looks. "What is she talking about?" I demanded. "It's in there." Harlan nodded to the envelope. "DNA test results from 20 years ago." My hands shook as I found the document. "The man who raised me was your stepfather," Harlan finished. "Your biological father is Marcus Reynolds, the venture capitalist." Bruno whistled. The one who died in the same car accident as James." I stood up, pacing. "They were together that night. Both of them died when the car—" My phone rang. "Natasha, are you watching this? Your mom's claiming Marcus Reynolds left you controlling interest in his tech holdings. Says that's why she orchestrated the marriage to Rick, to protect you from corporate raiders." "She's lying," I said automatically. But Harlan was already pulling out more documents. "Actually, she's not. Marcus changed his will 3 days before he died. Left everything to his daughter, you." Bruno leaned forward. That would make you the majority shareholder of the company Rick and my mother tried to steal, I finished, along with half a dozen others. My office door opened again. Janet rushed in, waving her tablet. Have you seen the stock market? Your mother's announcement just sent our shares soaring. Investors think there's going to be a merger with Reynolds Tech. There won't be, I said firmly, but then paused, looking at Bruno. Unless, he grinned, unless that's exactly what we want them to think. I turned to Harlan. How legally binding is this inheritance? Ironclad. Marcus had the best lawyers in the country. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We should talk. Marcus Jr., your half-brother, Harlan explained. He's been running Reynolds Tech since your father died. I looked at the small crowd in my office, my team, my real family. Thoughts? Merge the companies, Bruno said immediately. We'd dominate the market. Use your mother's confession against her, Natasha added. She just admitted to orchestrating fraud to control an inheritance that was rightfully yours. And Rick? Janet asked. I smiled. Let's give him one last chance to prove his loyalty. The next hour was a blur of calls and emails. By sunset, I had a meeting scheduled with Marcus Jr., a draft merger proposal from our lawyers, and a visitor request from Rick. You don't have to see him, Natasha said, as we rode the elevator to the holding facility. Yes, I do. I straightened my jacket. He needs to understand exactly what he lost. Rick looked smaller in his jumpsuit, defeated. His eyes widened when he saw me. Soleil, save it. I sat down across from him. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a full confession, including Marlene's role in my father's death. In exchange, I'll make sure you serve your time in a minimum security facility. And if I don't? I slid a photo across the table. Him and Marlene, standing over Marcus Reynolds's car, dated the night of the accident. Where did you? My father had a dash cam. I stood up. You have until tomorrow to decide. Wait, he called as I turned to leave. What about us? Everything we built. I paused at the door. We didn't build anything, Rick. You and my mother destroyed everything you touched. I'm just rebuilding it stronger. Outside, Natasha was waiting with Marcus Jr., a tall man with our father's eyes. Ready to change the tech world? He asked, extending his hand. I took it, feeling the weight of two legacies merging into one. Ready to do it right this time. The courtroom fell silent as Marlene took the stand. She'd aged years in the weeks since her arrest, her designer outfit replaced by standard-issue clothing, her perfect makeup absent. Mrs. Parker, the prosecutor began. Please tell us about the night of March 15th, 20 years ago. I leaned forward slightly, Marcus Jr.'s steady presence beside me in the gallery. This was the moment we'd waited for, the truth about our father's death. It was raining, Marlene said, her voice hollow. James and Marcus were meeting to discuss the evidence they'd found about the embezzlement. Your embezzlement, the prosecutor clarified. Objection, her lawyer called out. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Parker. Marlene's eyes found mine in the crowd. Yes, my embezzlement. And my plans for Soleil's inheritance. The jury stirred. I kept my face neutral, even as Marcus Jr.'s hand tightened on the bench between us. What happened next? They were going to expose everything. The missing funds, the forged documents, the fact that Marcus was Soleil's real father. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I couldn't let that happen. So you tampered with the brake lines. Rick did the actual tampering. I just told him where and when. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Despite the prosecution's warnings, hearing her admit, it still felt like a physical blow. And 20 years later, you orchestrated your daughter's marriage to this same man. I needed someone I could control, Marlene said, her composure cracking. Someone who owed me. Rick was perfect, ambitious but weak. Together we could guide Soleil, keep her from asking questions about her inheritance. Until she did start asking questions, the prosecutor pressed. She was never supposed to find out. Marlene's calm facade shattered completely. Everything I did was to protect her. From what, Mrs. Parker? From her rightful inheritance. From the truth about her father's murder. Objection. Withdrawn. The prosecutor turned to the jury. No further questions. During the recess, Marcus Jr. and I stood in the courthouse corridor, watching rain streak the windows. Just like that night, he said quietly. Did you know? I asked. About me being your sister? Not until after Dad died. Found a letter in his office. He turned to face me. I wanted to tell you, but his lawyers said we had to wait until you were 25. By then, you were married to Rick. Bruno appeared with coffee and updates. Rick's testimony is scheduled for this afternoon. His lawyer says he's ready to detail everything. Including the recent fraud? Marcus Jr. asked. Everything? Bruno confirmed. The house sale, the company theft attempt, even Marlene's offshore accounts. My phone buzzed. Natasha, you need to see this. Marlene's cellmate talked to the press. The attached article detailed conversations where Marlene had bragged about other corporate schemes, other families she'd manipulated. The scope of her deception stretched back decades. Your Honor, the prosecutor said when court resumed. The state calls Richard Parker to the stand. Rick wouldn't look at me as he took the oath. He'd lost weight in custody, his expensive suits replaced by prison orange. Mr. Parker, please tell us about your relationship with Marlene Parker. I met her at a business conference in 2001, Rick began. She said she had a proposition for me. If I helped her maintain control of her daughter's inheritance, she'd make me rich. And the murder of Marcus Reynolds and James Parker. She had evidence of some illegal trades I'd made. Said if I didn't help her, she'd turn me in. So I tampered with the brakes while she created an alibi. And your marriage to Soleil. All planned. Every meeting, every coincidence. Marlene orchestrated everything. The testimony continued, each revelation worse than the last. When Rick finally stepped down, the judge called another recess. Ms. Reynolds, a court officer approached. Your mother's asking to speak with you, privately. Marcus Jr. touched my arm. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I straightened my jacket. This ends today. They led me to a small conference room. Marlene sat handcuffed to the table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I did love you, she said, before I could speak. Everything I did was for yourself, I cut in. Every scheme, every manipulation, every death. I made you strong. No, I placed my hands on the table, leaning forward. You made me suspicious, untrusting, and afraid. But you know what? You also made me smart enough to beat you at your own game. Soleil, please. Goodbye, Marlene. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and the Reynolds-Parker merger. It goes through tomorrow. Everything you tried to steal, we're building into something better, something honest. Her anguished cry followed me out, but I didn't look back. In the corridor, my real family waited. Marcus Jr., Bruno, Natasha, Harlan. Together, we walked into the rain, ready to write a new chapter. Behind us, the courtroom doors closed on the past, sealing away 20 years of lies with the sound of justice being served. Ready? Marcus Jr. asked, adjusting my microphone as camera crews set up in the conference room. Born ready. I smoothed my blazer and checked my notes one last time. This press conference would reshape everything. The doors opened and journalists flooded in, including Natasha, who gave me a subtle thumbs up from her seat. Bruno stood to my right, while Marcus Jr. took his place to my left. A united front. Thank you all for coming, I began, facing the sea of cameras. Today marks not just the merger of Reynolds Tech and Parker Technologies, but a commitment to transparency and ethical leadership. Cameras flashed as I continued. In light of recent events, we're establishing the Reynolds-Parker Foundation for Corporate Ethics, dedicated to preventing the kind of fraud and manipulation that claimed our father's life. Ms. Reynolds, a reporter called out, what about the victims of your mother's other schemes? Every case is being investigated, I replied. The Foundation's first act will be establishing a restitution fund for affected families. And the company's future? Bruno stepped forward. Our combined resources will focus on developing security systems to prevent corporate fraud. We're turning our tragedy into protection for others. My phone vibrated. A message from the prison warden. Marlene Parker found unconscious in cell. Apparent suicide attempt. I kept my expression neutral, continuing to answer questions, while Marcus Jr. read the message over my shoulder. His hand found mine under the podium, squeezing gently. After the press conference, we gathered in my office. Harlan arrived with updates. Marlene's stable, he reported. They found a stockpile of pills she'd been collecting. Of course, I said, pouring coffee for everyone. One last attempt at manipulation. The media's already spinning it, Natasha added, showing us her tablet. Public sympathy angle. Let them spin, Marcus Jr. said. We have work to do. Bruno pulled up our project timeline on the wall screen. The security software launch is set for next month. Early tests show it would have caught both Rick's embezzlement and Marlene's consulting fraud. Speaking of Rick, Harlan interjected. His full confession went public this morning. Every scheme, every manipulation, dating back 20 years. I walked to the windows, looking out at the city skyline. Send copies to all our shareholders. They deserve to know exactly what their investment is fighting against. A knock at the door revealed Janet with an urgent expression. The board's asking about the old summer house, the one Rick bought through the shell company. Perfect timing, I smiled. Show them this. I pulled up the renovation plans on my tablet. The summer house, transformed into a corporate retreat center, specifically designed for ethics training and whistleblower protection programs, turning their secret meeting place into a beacon of transparency. Marcus Jr. nodded approvingly. Dad would have loved that. Ms. Reynolds? My assistant poked her head in. There's a group here from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They want to discuss implementing your security software across all publicly traded companies. The room buzzed with excitement. This was bigger than revenge now. This was revolution. Before we meet them, I addressed my team. I want to thank you all. None of this would have been possible without you. Please, Natasha scoffed. You had this planned from the moment you bought that secret apartment. Not everything, I admitted. I never planned on finding a brother or building something this important. Speaking of building, Bruno pulled out a folder. The Children's Hospital called. They want to name their new research wing after Marcus Reynolds. Dad's dream project, Marcus Jr. explained. He always wanted to fund pediatric research. Then let's make it happen, I decided, but with one addition. A specialized unit for children affected by domestic manipulation and fraud. Give them the support I never had. The SEC team was shown in, just as my phone lit up with another prison update. Marlene, awake now, requesting a visit. Not this time, I murmured, declining the request. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Ready to change the world? Marcus Jr. asked, as we headed to the conference room. I looked at my unlikely family, my brother who shared my father's vision, my friends who became my strength, my colleagues who chose integrity over profit. In their faces, I saw not the reflection of Marlene's manipulation, but the future we were building from its ashes. The world's already changing, I replied. We're just making sure it changes for the better. Together, we walked into the conference room, carrying not just our father's legacy, but the promise of protection for every family, every business, every dream that deserved to grow without fear of betrayal. Behind us, the city sparkled in the sunlight, its shadows no longer hiding secrets, but illuminating possibilities. This was more than revenge. This was redemption, reformation, and rebirth, all rolled into one unstoppable force for change.